Some of the greatest stories and storytellers in Washington, D.C. emanate from the same address, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Today's guests, Hunter Morgen and Will Russell, my colleagues at Ballard Partners, have each worked behind the scenes to help the president put on the greatest show on earth. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., it's 13th and Park.
The hard things that are necessary, we either do it or we'll pay the price down the road.
That often is missing in politics.
We have to solve everything.
It's a nightmare.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
I have faith in the American people.
Those are the facts.
The Illuminati, right there. Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
We went from North Korea to M&M. That's a lot, man.
What's in this tea?
Well, it's great to have Hunter and Will in studio. I know you guys are really taking this seriously because of the way you dressed. And I give your wife, Cora, a lot of credit because I'm sure she had something to do with this outfit, Hunter. And this is, absolutely classic three-piece Mississippi. So
That's right. That's right.
So the world now knows both of you as, members of Ballard Partners, but not so long ago, you were a member of another team, Team Trump. And both of you with very, very different perspectives. Hunter coming from a more cerebral, I would say, policy-oriented perspective with the White House. And my friend Will here, very visceral and exciting, given everything you got into. So let's start with you, Will. You came at the very old age of 25 and a half, I think, into the White House, right, after the campaign. And you very quickly got into presidential advance. And I was reading into this, I came to understand it was every piece of that trip, right? Mm-hmm. It was not just the travel itself. It was the policy briefings. It was who they're going to meet, all the other connections that determine whether or not the show, so to speak, is going to come off without a hitch. What was that like?
No day was the same, which I think for me is what I enjoy. It's what I enjoy about the work that we do right now. Each day presents a problem set that you have to solve. And for advance specifically, and I know that it's kind of a niche market, not a whole lot of people don't know and understand. We set up trips from wheels down to wheels up. That was my first job, was to lead advance. And to be able to be the eyes and ears on the ground for not just the White House, I did it for the campaign as well. It was rather empowering. And I have to give a lot of credit to the staff that I worked with, both on the campaign and in the 45 White House. Mm-hmm. They allowed us to do our job and do it well. I mean, there was a trust factor. And when you look at the trips themselves, like the president has to trust you. Because as an advanced lead, you are leading the president from place to place to place. Right. There's obviously an operations apparatus around the president, which as I grew in my role, as I grew in the White House, I kind of took more and more seniority and was able to be that who, what, where, when, why guy as the president's trip director later in my career. But from an advanced lead, I'm young, right? And I'm basically making live TV every 3 or 4 days.
Right.
Live TV in front of 20,000 people. It was exhilarating. It was like a drug.
Would the president be at times look at you, like make sure everything was on cue? I mean,
1,000%.
Like to make sure there's nothing around him that wasn't going according to plan.
Right. That's exactly it. And the funniest part, so we're all sitting down here. I'm 6'5", right? So I stand.
I want you to know I had 3 cushions underneath me today just to almost go eye to eye with you. Yes. I'm right about at eye level with the president. And I think sometimes that's the only thing that saved me was he would look at me and be like, okay, you can stay.
He's got a type, right? Central casting is
Central casting. He talked about it.
Hunter would have been lost in that part of the world.
That's right. I'm looking down at Hunter. Hello, Hunter. The president relies on his advance team. And that was the joke, especially in 2016, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't this massive apparatus, a well-oiled machine like we saw in 2024. In 2016, it was Donald Trump, a Twitter handle, and an advance team.
Yeah.
And an airplane, right? Kellyanne said it the best. We got 10 people in an airplane, and that's all we need to run this thing. So
and they did.
Well, this is what happens when you run as an outsider, right? I mean, he comes to Washington. He's still the outsider. He brings in a bunch of people, some of whom are still coming from the same outsider class, we'll say. And you had to kind of learn very quickly on the job. Now, Hunter, you were, 22 years old or so when you were involved in the campaign, but I think you also worked at the State Department, the policy of the State Department. You go into the campaign. part of a miracle ride. Suddenly you're in the transition team. In the transition team, you go into policy, working with people like Stephen Miller and Peter Navarro. You must have thought, as this is happening, this is all happening very quickly. Yeah, is this real? I mean, did it ever feel surreal to you?
Oh, it was totally surreal from day one when I walked into Trump Tower for my first ever experience in the sort of Trump orbit. So I've been working with the Chris Christie for President team for a little bit, and a friend of mine. Yeah, exactly. Right. So
I did not know that. I learned something new about you.
Okay, we're going to cut him off right now. We're going back to Will. No.
We were up in New Hampshire, and a buddy of mine, someone you know very well, goes, "Oh yeah, these Trump guys reached out to me, and they're jokers. They got no shot." And I go, "Why don't you give me that phone number real quick?" And so I give him a call because you could tell where the momentum was going, and this was early, like really, really early on. And yeah, I just graduated college. I was sort of like trying to find out what I was going to do. I called the Trump folks. I said, I'm interested. They said, "Oh, you got experience with the Christie team. All right, why don't you come into Trump Tower, do an interview?" Talked to a couple folks, came in. Great. Start on Monday. Go in, first experience, you're in the 5th floor of Trump Tower, which was the old Apprentice Studios, talking to Corey, and he goes,
Corey Lewandowski,
yeah. He goes, "So what do you think you could do? Would you help us out?" I go, "Look, I do a little bit of policy. It's kind of what I'm interested in, speechwriting, sort of that realm." And he goes, "All right, well, you got to talk to Stephen. You got to talk to Stephen. Introduced to Stephen Miller. Stephen goes, "I need you to get me a list, never forget this, very detailed list of some random statistics for South Carolina." Sure, no problem. Type it up, certain 14-point font, bing, bing, bing. Probably 2 hours later, we're all gathered around to watch the boss speak in South Carolina. So, my people gave me this. Can you believe this?
Pulls
out the exact paper.
Wow.
Reads it off. Because that's what he would do. They would go place to place, pull out the listed, there's been 47 murders, there's been carjackings, whatever. Puts it back, goes back on the thing. And I go, oh my gosh. It's like my second day on the job. I'm like, this is pretty unreal. And the really interesting thing was that the speechwriting emanated the policy, right? It created the policy. So there was no white papers. There was no 30-point plans. It was all of the policy came from his speeches, right? He would do foreign policy speeches. He would do, domestic policy. He would do sort of veteran stuff, whatever. And that's where all the policy came from. And I think that's something the Trump team really innovated, because in the past, Hillary would come out, I've got my 60-page plan on how we're going to reform this and do that. People don't care. They don't read it. That's for the DC inside kind of wonk folks, right? Trump would say the things that he was going to do, and as we know now, he still does it.
So that's why Stephen Miller has been so involved in speechwriting.
Hand in glove, and it still is, right? And if you look at some of the folks who are still around and involved today, I mean, Vince is running Domestic Policy Council. He was involved intimately in speechwriting the whole time in campaigns, so.
All of this relies on the instinct of Donald Trump, right? That's what we're talking about here. That's one of the things that I found interesting about a Trump campaign, now Trump presidencies, was he was so in touch with his people. That was one of the things that he would say. He would ask a staffer who's presenting them with information. It's like, what do my people say? And he's not talking about his people, his staff. He's talking about the people that he talks to every single day. And that's the differentiating factor in my mind between a Trump campaign and any other Republicans that we saw, because they're relying on the Frank Luntzes of the world. They're relying on think tanks downtown, watching poll numbers.
I always felt that the only poll that the president ever really paid attention to were the audience numbers, the number of people watching, right? That was his poll. It wasn't, am I up, I'm down, around. It is, are enough people watching that what I'm about to say or do is going to have consequence? And I know he measured those numbers, those ratings against the others, right? Every time he saw a bigger number on his end than, say, Hillary or anyone else he was competing against, he thought that was a good day, right?
That's exactly it. And the interesting thing about his rise is he tapped into a group of people that always existed. When we talk about MAGA, what is MAGA? No one can really define MAGA, because to each person, MAGA is something different. But he knew that there was a market, and being the expert brander that he is, came in and simply put a name to it. Donald Trump is a vehicle for the forgotten man.
And I think a lot of those populist points have continued on in the different iterations of sort of the MAGA movement or the Trump movement as you continue to go, right? Because if you look at Trump, the candidate from 2016, and Trump, the president now, 47th president of the United States, there's a lot of things that he switched and changed positions on, but it still follows that same real populist sort of I'm going to put the forgotten men and women of this country first. And those sort of core values of, unfair trade, right? Immigration. Those things are all the same. The means to the end are a little bit different.
Isn't it kind of like, the president can really read the room? The room in this case is the country. And that's why there's adaptability. That's why he's evolved since the first time he started running for president to where he is today. So, Will, you've been all over the world, right, with the president. Favorite memory? One of those things where you said, oh, my God, this is happening in real time and I'm here.
Okay, I'm going to tell a story about being in Brussels for NATO, right? I think this might have been day 3. We were supposed to leave where he was staying at like 8 o'clock in the morning for all of the meetings, the plenary meetings that were happening. And he had several scheduled and several bilaterals in between. It was a jam-packed schedule. 8 o'clock comes, goes, he's nowhere to be found. We fast forward. This is like 45 minutes, almost an hour.
Wow.
Well, the valet goes in and he's like, he's getting dressed. And at this point, Jordan Karam, who was the personal aide, is just like, I'm going to go down to the cars. And I said, okay. So it's just me and the valet standing here, and I'm holding the speech that he's supposed to give. So he comes out and he is frustrated when he comes out of his room. And I say, sure, we're a little bit late, so we're going to skip some of the pomp and circumstance. When we arrive, here's your speech. And he takes it and he flips. And he goes, how many times do I have to give the same speech to the same group of people before they get it? And I said, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure if you do it today, they might get it.
They might listen.
They may listen this time.
Right.
And so we get in the car and we drive over to the big, beautiful NATO building, which he had just gotten done bemoaning the fact that we had spent, don't quote me on this, but I think it was $1 billion building that building. And the United States gave a lot into it. So he goes into the plenary meeting, throws his speech to the side, and starts going around the table, one after one, for each country and how much they owed.
There you go.
So that blew up, effectively, the schedule that we had. He comes out during the break and finds me, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Andrew Riddall, who was the staff press lead at the time, and says, I want to be abundantly clear on something. As soon as I walk out of this plenary session, I want to have a press conference. I want to be the first person that's at a microphone talking. And I said, generally, I think the Secretary General is usually the first one. He said, nope, we're going to go find a press conference area. Days before, I had this inkling that this was going to happen.
It's going to come down.
Yeah. So I had a box truck parked in a remote corner of the parking lot that's outside the building, full of his podium and all of the assets that we needed. And we set up that press conference in about the entire room in about 30 minutes. He came out. He was the first one with the sticks. I had a great team in Brussels. Sarah, now Governor Sanders, great friend. Working with her through that event was incredible. So that's the mind of Donald Trump. That's how he thinks. He knew what he was going to do long before I gave him the binder and said, here's your speech.
The only question mark then was when he was going to tell you.
Right, exactly.
Right.
But that's like the genius of Donald Trump. That was what I got to see from an operational standpoint.
So, Hunter, you spent all this time in the White House, as did Will, doing, again, the more serious, cerebral thing. No offense, Will.
I've never heard him be called cerebral, but okay.
Well, his wife, Cora, made me promise I'd say it at least twice. So, the day in the White House, what is it like? Take us inside that experience.
Well, I always say the advanced guys have the best stories and they got the best intel because they're with the principal all the time. On the policy side of things, you're with your principal. So, in my capacity at the White House, I was deputy to Stephen Miller and Peter Navarro, right? I basically had 2 jobs, special assistant to the president, senior advisor for policy and strategy. And Peter worked a lot on the trade, buy American, hire American side of things. Stephen worked a lot on the sort of immigration side of things. Still is true to this day, as we know, and they're still in the mix. And, it's very interesting because it's not like in the West Wing, the show where you've got the president walking around all the time and doing stuff.
No, that's discouraging.
Yeah,
right?
I know. Yeah, you really don't bump into him. It's sort of a choreographed thing of like, you're going to see him and he's usually late and you'll be waiting for him, right? We wrote, 7 executive orders that I wrote and was a part of. A lot of them were repealed under Biden, but we're going to try and get some of those back now. But yeah, I mean, working through the policy process was always often a very interesting thing, especially in the Trump White House, where the policy process was not defined early on and it got more defined later on. And it sounds like they're, really have a handle on it now.
So you say it matter-of-factly, Hunter, about helping to write executive orders. Well, I know the president issued more than 200 executive orders in the first administration. He's already up today to, I think, 153 in a couple of months.
Counting. I'm sure we'll have a few out when we get out of here.
Right.
A few.
Exactly. You say it like, oh, yeah, it's an executive order. But those are kind of big things. Were you there in some of the signing ceremonies? And we see a lot of those today where the president signed an executive order on something, and it has incredible consequence.
Yeah, I was in the back of the room. I wasn't behind the oval. I wasn't behind the Resolute desk. But, you're in there and it's great to see and kind of interact. And nowadays they do a lot of these open press where it's sort of the classic Trump press conference that you see of he's behind the desk, holds up signs, does questions and answers. But, in the first term, some of these, they just would do sort of closed press behind closed doors and kind of have a couple, quick signing things. It sort of depends on what the issue is, right? If it's a more sort of technical thing, now it seems like they're doing open press for pretty much all of them. But there's a couple that I was in there. I mean, one of the first ones I worked on was Buy American and Hire American. It was early on executive order where we really set, as the president calls it and still calls it, his 2 simple rules for his administration, right? To buy American and hire American. So it was a lot of technical government purchasing things on buying American things and hiring American workers and contracts and stuff like that. That was a very fun one we did. Another thing that you guys might have heard of called the travel ban. Worked a lot on that. That was a very fun one.
Things about that.
And, things like that, like recalcitrant countries, right? Something that is still an issue today of when people refuse to be taken back to their country, right? For a while, it was like, they're just not going to take them back. Oh, well, we've got these guys here and, they're just kind of sitting around. And, the genius of the Trump policy staff was like, well, why don't we just stop their people from coming here if they're not going to take their people back, right? I mean, it's things like that sounds so simple and it's like a common sense kind of idea. Those are sort of the most fun ones to work on.
What is it like in terms of camaraderie? Yes, there's going to be all sorts of fighting, infighting, whatever. There always is with a family, right? As you think back on your days now, is there a special sense of camaraderie that you have with all those men and women you worked with around a president that, whether you like the president or not, is transformative, is amazingly different? Do you still have those kinds of relationships where you always, when you see them on the street, so to speak, it just brings it kind of all back?
Oh, 1,000%. You're walking through fire with a group of people. And for the 45 days, it wasn't just Democrats we were fighting. It was the press. It was our own party. When you're working those late nights, those long hours, that absolutely forges a relationship that you're not going to find anywhere else. There would be some times that we couldn't start building a site until 7 p.m. And so I'm on site building out all night for an event that's happening the next day. So you're going days without sleep, but you're doing it together as a team.
Yep.
Their success is my success,
100%.
the way that I look at that. You want to talk about real camaraderie? I loved my trip coordinator so much in my office that I married her.
I was going to say I've got a similar point there, but the thing about the 2016 campaign, right? There will be nothing like it again in the history of American politics, right? When you look at the tight-knit group of folks that were there, and I still say some of those people from 2016 are best friends to this day. And like Will said, they're going back in. I mean, yeah.
That's us. We're here.
It is truly one of the most tight-knit groups in that I can ever imagine. You have these folks who are still involved, and most of the 16 guys are still in the mix. We're still in the mix to the extent, right? We're all still kind of in it. People kind of go in and out of favor. And I think there's always that kind of hearkening back to, though, hey, he's a 2016 guy.
That's our litmus test, right?
That's it. Because you can be anyone kind of Johnny-come-lately with the president, right? I mean, he's been around for so long now that everyone kind of comes around and okay, members of Congress who have kind of finally coming around. But there's always something special about those OG 2016ers.
When did you join?
Yeah.
That's the trick
OG
question.
16ers,
when did you join?
Yeah. And the best part is, the real guys know. Right. I mean, we know we're this doesn't pass the smell test.
No,
right? We know the guys who have been in the room and around for a while. And that, I mean, really, as far as, just kind of knowledge of how the orbit works, that's institutional knowledge that cannot be taught or gained from any. I mean, those are the kind of things that you can't buy that.
So let me ask you, Will, tell me one thing about the president that is not obvious, that if you really spent time behind the curtain, so to speak, that you'd really understand. And I wish you knew that about him, because it would make what he does and how he does it so much more plain and compelling.
His public persona is not necessarily representative of who he is as a person, right? So after the White House was done, I traveled with him, a small staff, down to Palm Beach, and I worked for him 21, 22, and then we started the campaign in 23.
Mm-hmm.
But those years of 21 and 22, I got to see him operate as businessman Donald Trump, right? So I saw a couple different things. One, I saw his attention to detail. So the first trip back, we blocked off like 4 hours when we got to Mar-a-Lago. And Bern Lemke, who's the GM of Mar-a-Lago, we took a very small group and we walked around the property. And boy, that was the first time he had paid attention to the property in about, like, actually paid attention in 4 years. And we were ripping up trees and we were fixing cracks and we were tearing down buildings to build a new bathroom out. That was the kind of stuff that we were doing. So it was wonderful to see that, to see how much of a critical thinker he is and how his attention to detail and his vision through that. So that was incredible. And so, one, I can see how that translates to the vision and his vision for the country.
Mm-hmm.
Two, he's a much kinder person than he would normally say.
And that the media gives him credit for, or anyone gives him credit for.
Right. Anywhere we went in the United States for a disaster, whether it be tornado, fire, those were some tough trips because he couldn't be the commander-in-chief that projects strength. He had to be a comforter-in-chief.
Right.
I think about Paradise, California, that was absolutely decimated.
Mm-hmm.
We went out there and there was a little old lady. We did kind of a tour and there was one shot that looked a couple football fields through burned out trees. Everything's ash. It's just completely decimated. His back and her back were to the camera and he kind of just puts her arm around her. That's him. That's him. Not the guy that's saying, "You're fired." That's him.
And he's not looking for the cameras.
No,
at that
he
point.
wasn't.
He knows this is what.
He just knows.
Yes.
I'll give you another story.
Yeah.
When Will mentioned how he met his wife, I met my wife on the campaign in 2016 as well. We got engaged.
So you're already a winner,
Yeah.
regardless of what happened in the final.
So when we got engaged, I was working in the White House. I get a note on my desk. Hunter heard the news. Congratulations, or handwritten note. I mean, that's, again, kind of cares about the details, cares about his people, cares about these types of things, right? You don't see that in the media. You don't get that.
Well, it's a tough thing where you're supposed to be projecting strength and confidence and certainty. And another when you have to play parent, right? At times like the one you talked about in California, when the human heart is, writ large and people are looking for just that proverbial shot in the arm that tomorrow's going to be a little bit better than today.
Well, and I'll tell you that the worst trips that we did were the Dover trips, Dover Air Force Base.
Yeah.
The dignified transfer. We would be traveling out somewhere, and on the way back, the mill aide would tell me, "Hey, there's this dignified transfer that's scheduled at this time. If we plan it out, we can go and be a part of it." And I would run that by the chief of staff, make sure everybody's on board, and then we present that option to the president. And it was one of those things that he never said no, but he hated doing it. And it's not for the fact that he didn't want to be there. It's for the fact that he understood the gravity of the job and that a decision, whether it be Pentagon, whether it went all the way up to him, a decision was made that resulted in a casualty, a loss of life for a U.S. soldier. But he was always wonderful in those situations. He was always caring, and he would spend so much time with the families before we would head to the flight line, which speaks volumes to who he is as a person. Like, he understands the personal hurt. And it's not fun. It's not enjoyable. Nobody wants to do that, but it's a reality of life that I think that he recognizes, and he knew his role in that specific case. That's who he is as a person.
Well, you get a lot of that feel, too, in perspective from all your Mississippi roots, as they say, right? With Senator Thad Cochran, who was an amazing human being, as well as a very effective senator. We always kid here in Washington about the Mississippi Mafia, right? And I know you still feel a sense of home there, right? That when you go back to Mississippi, it brings you back to boots on the ground and you take perspective again. But when you do return home and you think back on all the experiences you've already had at the tender age of 20-something, you must think, wow, what an amazing break I got.
Yes. I am a small town kid from Mississippi. I graduated with 12 people in my high school class. I kept a box behind my desk at the White House because I was waiting for the day that somebody would walk in and say, you're not supposed to be here. And I'd be like,
You're nodding, so this is right.
Oh, yeah.
I'd be like, you're right. You're absolutely right. I will say this though, and I cannot move forward without noting that I'm a man of faith. And for whatever reason, God has allowed me to be in this position. And that's every day that I woke up in the White House, that's the approach that I took.
Yep.
Was I'm allowed to be here. So what is it that I need to be doing? Every day that I woke up and went into the White House was a good day. And it wasn't because of the job that I had. It was because of the job we as a collective were doing for the country.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that it doesn't matter if you are the president, to Hunter, to the folks who were walking around moving paper from office to office or taking out the trash. We were all doing something to make a difference for the country.
Right.
And for whatever reason, a small town kid from Mississippi, God saw a reason to put me in that place.
So, Hunter, to kind of wrap this up, are you bullish about, America right now and the way things are going? I mean, obviously, whenever you do big change, and that's what the president is really going after. I mean, major, transformative, once-in-a-generation change. It's not going to be a smooth, straight line. But you also understand that so many things were not working right, that something had to be done.
How can you not be bullish about this, right? How can you not be? Like, if you look at the trade agenda, right? We are literally trying to decouple and change the way we look at trade in this country, right? This is a huge deal. It can't happen overnight, right? But you got to trust in the president's vision because, as we've said, he cares about these things, right? I think when you look at everything he's done across the board, we are in for such a bright future, bright couple of years coming here, and everything is going to be great. And like you said, the best is yet to come. So I think we're really in store for some great things, and stay tuned. Buckle up. It'll be fun for sure.
Buckle up. Will?
I agree with that. I draw some parallels on Reagan's first term with this term.
Yeah.
If you look back, Reagan lost midterms, big numbers.
Now, for the record, you weren't alive yet. So
No, that's right.
I want you to know I was there, actually. I mean,
Right.
I lived through that.
And what happened? What happened 2 years later?
Right.
He won by the largest electoral college margin that we've ever seen.
Yep.
I kind of look at this from Trump's perspective. The president is actively working toward a goal, but in order to get to that goal, there's going to be some pain along the way. But when we come out the other side, it's going to be better than it's ever been before. And I think that perspective is what Americans need to keep in mind. And in this age of 24-hour news cycle, it can get sensationalized, but perspective is the most important thing. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So we're kind of in that same position right now, and I'm excited to see what happens.
Well, the nice thing about being with both of you is, it's very clear that you love the president as much as you love the country. And it shows in how you conduct yourselves and what you've done with your lives at the tender ages of under my age. And keep at it, because if I were to take this interview in part as a instructional manual for the young people of America and how they can aspire, how they can dream, and how they can do. And next time we do this, I want you to wear the brighter, kind of sportier suit. Okay.
I'll go Mafia.
You'll go straight.
I'm going to wear, I think, my master's jacket. I got some green buttons.
Will and Hunter, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.